Next, we'll pick the composition, number 5, Shape Layer Advanced, to see how we can stroke fills with gradients. What we want to do is first create a shape for our gradient stroke. So starting over in the corner, I'll click and drag. I'll click and drag again and again to create a very simple curve. Now I don't want to fill this, but instead want to stroke. So I can do this two ways. As we know, we can go down into the timeline and modify this, or change this up here in our options. Again, in our timeline, we'll want to change the values for the stroke so that we change from a butt cap to a rounded cap. We have a single shape now created. We could continue to draw more shapes with the pen tool by simply clicking and drawing. If we hover over the originally drawn path, we'll add points to the existing path. We don't want to do that. Instead, we want to click in a space not currently occupied by a path or by a vertice. And we'll click and draw some more paths. And continue to do the same. With this path now drawn, I now have shape 2. Again, I'll have to go down into the stroke value and change the cap from a butt cap to a round cap. I'll create 2 more strokes the same way. In the final shape, shape 4, I'll change this stroke from butt cap to round cap. Now that we have all of these shapes with a stroke on each one, we'll twirl these up and take a look at just our last path. Here we have stroke 1, which is a solid stroke. However, we can also add a gradient stroke. The gradient stroke is applied above the solid stroke and has a width value of 2. We can increase the width value by clicking and dragging on the number, or change it numerically by typing in the number 15. The last thing we want to do before we change the gradient is change the line cap. We'll change this from butt cap to round cap. Here we can see the gradient appears to be a simple white running along the path and ending in black. If we click the word Edit Gradient, we'll bring up our gradient editor. If we edit the gradient here by, say, changing our white value to green, and changing the black value to a darker blue, then clicking OK, we can see that the midpoint is really only halfway between the left-hand side and the right-hand side of our stroke. If we choose the selection tool by typing V on the keyboard, we can see the start and the end of our stroke. Here's the start, and here's the end. By clicking and dragging on the endpoint, we can see that the gradient is really only a linear gradient and doesn't follow the path itself. It's an overlay which covers the stroke. I can scroll down to see the other attributes in my gradient stroke, which include the miter limit and the number of dashes and/or gaps that we want to apply to the stroke. We'll move up in the timeline, then close the gradient stroke. I'll select the gradient stroke here by using Ctrl-C, then close the entire contents of shape 4. I'll select shape 3, then paste it. Then I'll open up the parameters for shape 3. Here in shape 3, I can see that the gradient stroke has been applied, but it's been applied underneath the fill stroke. I'll have to move this up above the fill stroke in order to have this seen. It's still in the pasteboard, so I'll click shapes 2 and shape 1 as well, then paste it onto both of those. But again, I'll have to go into those layers, then move that effector up above the fill stroke. I'll close shape 1 and open shape 2 and move this gradient stroke up above stroke 1 here. Now I can see that each gradient stroke has its own start and end. We could navigate down into each one of these or set up an expression controlling the position point for the start and the end of all of the gradients by writing an expression for all of them. But rather than writing unique expressions or copying and pasting keyframes, we know that multiple paths can occupy a single group. So I'll open up Shape 2 and select Path 1. I'll copy it, I'll move down, select the group for Shape 1, then paste. Navigating down in the timeline, I can see that the path has now been pasted into the group with Path 1, but just down at the bottom. I'll close Shape 2 and turn off the visibility for that layer. Next, I'll go up to Shape 3, copy the path from Shape 3, close this, close the visibility, select Shape 1, then paste. Again, I'll do the same for Shape 4. I'll copy the path here using Ctrl-C or Command-C on the Mac, then close this and shut its visibility, then select Shape 1 and paste that into Shape 1. Now that all of these paths are down here at the bottom of Shape 1, I'll select all of them and simply drag them up so that they appear just below Path 1. Now that all of the paths are in a single group, I can delete Shapes 2, 3, and 4. Now that all of the paths are in a single group, the gradient stroke is affecting all of those paths together. Modifying the gradient path here is going to modify the way the gradient appears across all of these paths. The last thing I want to do is make this shape grow. So next, I'll add Trim Paths. Trim Paths appears just before gradient stroke after all of the paths in this layer. I'll open up the parameters and see that there's a start value, an end value, and an offset. By trimming the end, I'm actually trimming the ends of all of the drawn strokes. Each one of them is its own path. Down below end is the parameter for offset, and immediately below that is the ability to change the way I'm trimming multiple paths. Because I have more than one, each one of these is trimming simultaneously. That means they all go at the same time. However, I may want to change this to individually. By changing it to individually, this means that each path will be drawn sequentially one after the other. Now by changing the end value, the first path draws, then the second path, then the third, and last the fourth. This is drawing sequentially in order of the way the paths are presented inside this group. So first path 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. Creating an animation for the growth involves only setting a keyframe at the beginning for 0%, then at the end of our animation, say 15 frames later, at 100%. We'll navigate to 1 second, then type N on the keyboard to set our work area. We'll use 0 on the number pad to see a quick RAM preview. Scrubbing through here, we can see that each one comes in one after the other. I'll delete these keyframes by clicking on the stopwatch, then change my end value to 50%. Now, rather than animating either the start or the end, if I change the offset, it moves the length of the strokes through all of the paths in this group. Clicking and dragging on the degrees for offset, I can see how this value works. With this simple effector for trim paths, it's just a matter of setting up the different paths, including any shapes that we import from Illustrator. Now that we know this, creating a growth animation is very easy and only requires us to set up the paths, which we can do by even copying and pasting paths from Illustrator.